Greetings. We're back in the saddle again. We're now reaching a little different point. I've been somewhat relaxed with you through the first roughly 4 weeks, maybe really 3. And now it's time for you to start to focus, hopefully, and I'm very satisfied with what I've seen thus far. You've begun to sort of examine your artifacts, decide what it is exactly you want to include, and how you might build it. We're going to be looking at in a little more depth this time. I'm going to ask you to do some external reading. First of all, you might say, why do we have Alaska as the slides? Why did I choose those? Mainly because Dr. Barrett, the grande dame of this whole electronic portfolio business, at least in my experience, that's where she spent the majority of her career. She's now an individual entrepreneur. You'll see some of that a little bit later. Okay, systems issues. I just mentioned one, clearly. By now, you should begin to have a pretty good construct of what you want to include. Again, if you have further questions, I suggest you talk to your colleagues. The cohort has got a wide variety of expertise in it, and I think you can draw down some very useful indicators if you say, well, I'm not sure, April, what do you think? Or whoever, what do you think? The model, there are a wide variety of them. If you go again to Dr. Barrett's material, she's got quite a few of them in both of the two things under assignments. And finally, again, I defer usually to Karen and April on this one. How and where do you want to warehouse what you're doing? Because you need to have access to it. One of our colleagues sent me an email indicating that she had one, but unfortunately when she left that school, she could no longer access it. Now she did get it, but she couldn't refer people to that institution if they wanted to look at what she had. Okay, something which is new, and this is because I think Dr. Barrett had a bit to do with it. If you examine slide 3, you will notice a word, V word, vision. We've talked a lot about mission, vision, and values at an institutional level, but there also should be a personal vision. How do you see yourself engaging your professional milieu? That's very, very important. And she makes a very strong point about that. And you're going to have to deal with that vision in a couple of ways. Karen asked me, am I not doing a career development piece? Yes, you are. And you want to keep the vision slightly broad enough so that you don't have a whole lot of editing to do. If a job comes up and you follow the suggestions I made before, which is to do an environmental scan of that institution, try to plug into a network. You want to be able to use the vision mainly so that it's not so broad that people don't feel it has meaning, or so narrow it doesn't fit under the institutional vision. And the other one, of course, is part of this is supposed to be a way that you conceptualize yourself. And you should have a vision. I just mentioned that. Okay, when you move on and you take a look at something I think is important, we're only beginning to talk about using it. And I think we're going to do more with it. We're looking for Quality Matters. Several of us will be taking the Quality Matters assessment course. I hope to have done it last summer, but now we're putting away our pennies because the university won't pay, so we will. But there's potential for synergy there. What you're doing with your portfolio can be very helpful when we start looking at, for example, program assessment. This is at least one facet, the larger facet of CCLDP is a totally distance-driven, asynchronous-driven program. And the fact that we can use samples of the work that you do adds to our, if you will, validity with people in the professional world. I would encourage you, and I'm going to encourage her when I'm on campus a little bit later in the week, I'm going to encourage Dr. GK to share with us her research agenda. I saw it for the first time today. I was overawed with it. For one thing, it fits very, very closely into a number of things that colleagues who are ahead of you slightly, who are beginning to develop concept papers, see as where they want to do their research. And so it's a synergy of sorts. We will be able to help them achieve what they want, while at the same time the research agenda of the program is being reinforced. That's very, very important. Look at slide 8. Very good slide. Management matrix. Something that you will use. I encourage you, if you haven't, something you ought to peruse. You can probably get a synthesis of it online. One of the most famous leadership professors at Harvard University is a lady named Rosabeth Moss Kanter. You should be familiar, very familiar, with two of her works. The first one is Men and Women of the Corporation. And please remember, universities, colleges are corporations much like the Fortune 500. Her other book, When Giants Learn to Dance, is one of the best change management publications I'm familiar with. You ought to be familiar with Dr. Kanter and take a look at some of the syntheses of her work as you begin to think about, how do I fit into this picture? Back again to vision. Okay. One of the other things that comes up constantly, and I keep saying it, but I don't think I can say it enough, and that is collaboration. There's one slide in there where the letters are this high. That's how you work within the cohort model to produce the very best. The very next slide gives a list of the potential sizes that your EP might be. I'm not the person to advise you on that. I'm not that sophisticated technically. However, Karen is, and it seems to me, though I've only exchanged with her briefly, April is also. Ask them what size do they recommend. Ask April, for example, what size does she have her undergraduate students produce. When you take a look at slide 14, I know I'm moving ahead a little bit, but when you look at slide 14, you're going to see something I think is particularly helpful. There's some information there on what lens should one use when one is thinking about how to build the basic EP. And there's a word that was not in any of the other slides. Hence, again, my thought that I'm sure Dr. Barrett is the one that included it. And that is the issue of disaggregation. It's kind of a big, almost a jargon word, but in the number of ways that you're going to use the portfolio, the ability to disaggregate it efficiently is important, because you may be working on it for 2 or 3 purposes at the same time. So look at how that slide is set up. And remember what, as I say, I'm going to push GK to put that online somewhere so that all the students can see it, because I think that her research agenda shows you some of the elements you can use as lenses when you talk about building it and then disaggregating it for future purposes. Another thing we're going to talk a little bit more about later, but I want to bring it back into the picture now, is the issue of reflection. 2 types of reflection. First, you put a number of things out on the table, symbolic table, and decide, okay, where does this go? If I'm going to build if you will, a ladder of sorts, if I may use that term, or a scaffold if you prefer, what's going to be at the top, in the middle, in the bottom? Because that's for me as the person who is the architect. The second, and equally important, is it orchestrated in such a way that to whomever I'm sending it, it will be clear? Can't do much more than that. The next place I want to go is to what I said a few minutes ago when we talked about the issue of reflection. Now, you know that I'm big on reflection. You know that I studied postdoctorally with Steve Brookfield. I know many of you have read some of Steve's work. He's very, very well known in the leadership field, and he talks about reflection. I was very pleased that one of the reasons I include Dr. Barrett's work is she has provided some wonderful guiding material. So I am going to ask that you go to assignments. From assignments, you go to Dr. Barrett's electronic portfolio. What would I call that? It's kind of an overview. And once you get in there, there's a segment. It's rather long. None of the component parts are so long, but there are a number of component parts. And it's simply called Reflection for Learning. I would appreciate very much next week, sometime during the next week. Now, I'm making this on a Wednesday. It kicks in for you guys again on Friday. So sometime between Friday and next Wednesday, I would like to see a reaction to what in that reflect to learn did you find most useful. And be kind enough to tell me a little bit about why. This can go on the discussion board. It does not need to be terribly long, but I want to see whether I'm getting through, whether the importance of reflection is really something you're buying into. Okay, we're moving into some things. I'll have another suggestion for you of some things you need to move forward on next week, but right now I'm still very comfortable. Thank you.